Hello, welcome back to the channel. I have an amazing panel today to discuss the movie Maxxine, the third film in the X Pearl Maxine. I guess it's an X trilogy, you would call it, but Ty West's trilogy. And it's a very divisive film, I found, and that's kind of one of the things that made me want to talk about it with other people, because I think there's a lot to discuss here, and where it ranks within the trilogy itself.
So I really enjoyed it. I actually saw this. I got to see it on like the Wednesday night, the pre-showing. They had like a pre-night showing, and I saw it and I really liked it. But I felt like I had to see it again before I talked about it. It was one of those things where I can't just see a movie, go home, make a review, and then put it up the next day. I have done that before, and then afterwards, I'm just like, I don't know. I was like, maybe I was too high on it, maybe I was too, low on it or whatnot. Because like when I see a movie, I like to go see it as like a fan. And then I like to go see it a second time and maybe look at things. I saw this a second time, and I actually liked it better the second time, but I really liked it the first time. But after seeing it the first time, I was like, do I like because my favorite is X. So I wanted to be like, do I like this better than X? And then I kept saying, no, I don't like it better than X. And then I saw it again, and I was like, man, okay, I do really like this movie. It is a lot different from what I kind of thought it was going to be. And it was funny when watching it. I was like, I feel like some people aren't going to like this movie. I feel like they're going to expect a lot more, which I was okay with. And when I saw it, like the whole reveal of like who the killer is, I didn't know that was supposed to be like a big thing. Like I was sitting there, and my friend was like, "Oh, I like halfway through the movie, oh, I think I know who the killer is." In my mind, I was like, yeah, I knew that. Like going into the movie, I already knew who it was. I just assumed everybody else knew too, but maybe that was just a thing. But I really did enjoy it a lot. And I think that there's room for at least one more, not now, but maybe 5-10 years from now. So I really did enjoy it.
Cool. How about you, Tyler?
So funny thing, without even trying, I actually have seen the X trilogy in the chronological order. So like starting with Pearl, then X, and then with Maxine, which again, wasn't even going to because I never had any anticipation for X. It looked like another slasher to me, but then people had so many good things to say about Pearl, how it was a standalone prequel and all that crap. And literally the week I came home from the Toronto Film Festival where it actually premiered, it was Sunday afternoon. It had been out for like 2 to 3 days. I was the only one in the theater for Pearl, and man, did that feel like such a great experience watching a movie like that, especially for how retro a style of the movie was. Because like if I saw it with a crowd, something tells me that wouldn't have been as pleasant to be around. But I had a great time with that. And then I saw X late at night at home, and yeah, X really doesn't do it for me. To me, it's just another slasher filled with characters who I can't believe are that vapid that they get taken out by an old couple of all things. Like when Kid Cudi got killed by the one guy, I'm just sitting there going, how do you not see that coming, man? I mean, come on. And I also, maybe because I saw Pearl first, I didn't think Mia Goth with the old lady makeup was all that utilized as a villain. I'm just sitting there going, wait, so this was what built up the anticipation for Pearl? So when I saw the trailer for Maxine, I'm just sitting there going, okay, this looks kind of up my alley. I feel like this will be in the middle of the row for me. And yeah, having seen it the Wednesday night, same as Dude Who Loves Movies, I'm just sitting there going, do I like this more than Pearl, or is Pearl better? Like, I'm genuinely stuck on whether this is in the middle of the pack for me or first place, because I really love the style. I think Ty West has evolved a hell of a lot as a filmmaker, and really just shows how much he loves the era of filmmaking to the point where he genuinely made an 80s movie 40, 50 years later, and it still looks amazing to me.
Nice. How about you, Fritzky?
So I kind of have a bit of a complicated relationship with this trilogy because it has aged incredibly interestingly for me. I really enjoyed X a lot when I saw it. I've seen all three of these in the theater, and all three were very unique experiences. I really liked X a lot when I first saw it. Pearl came out, and I heard that it was different, but how different it ended up being kind of caught me off guard. And then as time went on, that was one where kind of like how you guys were saying about really having a second watch to solidify Maxine. That's how I felt about Pearl. I really had to give it a second go. And I think Pearl is definitely my least favorite. So when it came to Maxine, the thing that I was wondering about is what is this going to bring substantially to the franchise that could be seen as beneficial in the sense of carrying the story forward? Because personally speaking, I don't know how much Pearl really did it for me. And I think there's things about it I liked a lot, specifically Mia Goth, of course. I do like, how it utilized its, how it was going for the period piece. I really liked all of those aspects. It's a very colorful film. There's a lot of stuff I like about it. I just, as a standalone film, I don't know how much it for me stands on its own 2 feet. So I was kind of worried about that with Maxine. But in one sense, I, in kind of some ways, sort of feel that way, but I can definitely say I like it a lot more than Pearl. I still think X is my favorite, but with Maxine, I think the only thing really holding it back for me is that there is quite a lot to juggle. You have your Giallo-esque type stuff going on, paying homage. Specifically, the film I thought of was Blood and Black Lace. I saw a lot of similarities, especially with some of the Giallo tropes that film, I think, showcased a lot, as well as I kind of thought of Chinatown a lot as well with Kevin Bacon's character, I think it was. There was some neo-noir stuff going on as well. But all in all, I think while there was a lot going on, and I think some parts worked better than others, I think this was an incredibly interestingly directed film for sure. It's definitely the most ambitious film I think Ty West has done so far. I don't know how I feel about the last few minutes, but the last act I hear is the most torn apart thing for people. Like that's where it gets the most mixed. I loved the final act a lot because House of the Devil, which is another pretty divisive film he did. For those who've seen House of the Devil, it's kind of hard not to see that comparison. I don't know how much he was trying or not trying to pay homage to that previous film, but it reminded me of the final act in House of the Devil a lot. Sure, I saw the plot twist coming a bit, but that wasn't really what made it for me. I really appreciated the filmmaking and the execution of it quite a bit. I really enjoyed the editing of this film a lot. It kind of blew my mind when I saw in the opening credits that he edited this film. I was like, damn, this guy really, he had a lot going on in this film. And so many sequences, I really did appreciate the actual editing of it. When the VHS character gets killed, I forgot his name. That sequence was incredible. The lighting, the cuts, I thought that was all done really magnificently. And overall, there was a lot of different kinds of lighting going on throughout this film, but I don't know. That was a huge thing that stood out to me too. Overall, I think the only thing, another thing I guess I would say that is the only thing that is keeping me from running to the theater to see it again, because I do want to see it one more time, so I really have solidified thoughts. But it's just, I don't see this being an incredibly rewatchable film for me, because I feel like X, as time has gone on, I could watch it again now that it's been a little bit. Pearl, I don't feel like is that rewatchable to me. This one, I don't know. I do need to see it again to really, like, again, kind of how Dude Who Loves Movies was saying, like, really, like, know what I'm, really have my final thoughts put together. But yeah, so that's kind of my general first impressions on Maxine.
Yeah, and I think I love that all of you have similar yet completely different views on not only Maxine, but each film, just by themselves. And I think that is just something that, comes across with the genre of horror. And I think it's really interesting. I know you guys kind of all brought up the look of Maxine and Pearl. Like, I love kind of how Ty West, it's almost like a masterclass in trying, if you ask someone to be like, okay, make a movie that doesn't take place in this era, but was made in this era. And I feel like that really comes across in his movies. you know, obviously the 70s, you know, Texas Chainsaw Massacre types of films. Pearl, like, yes, it played a lot with The Wizard of Oz for sure. Like that's the most obvious thing with all the colors and the Technicolor look. But I feel like the pacing and tone of Pearl reminds me a lot of like more Hitchcockian films, things like that. And then this one definitely felt like I was watching an 80s movie. You know, it didn't necessarily feel like a movie that took place in the 80s. It was like, oh, was this made in like 1984, you know? My biggest issue with Maxine, and I agree with all of you, like I think I would need to rewatch it to fully, like, because I feel like there was a lot going on, and maybe it is there's either two camps of this. Either everything we saw, which I'd love to hear Cody's thoughts on this because you did see it twice, everything we saw the first time is like at face value, that's that. Or when you revisit it a second time, is there a lot that maybe I might have missed or the average viewer might have missed? Because although I think like on a technical level, I thought it was excellent, I still felt that Mia Goth's character wasn't given necessarily enough, but maybe that was just my expectations given seeing the previous films. What do you guys think about that?
So for like me, so for the scenery, like this movie like oozes 80s, but it's not like the poppy 80s. It's kind of more like the realistic 80s. Like, you know, like now when they make a movie, everything's all, you know, everything's all like, you're like, man, I want to go back there. But like now, like the realistic 80s in like LA, you're just like, oh man, there's like, you know, prostitutes everywhere. There's all kinds of like bad things going on. And at first I like, you kind of forget you're watching you forget you're watching Maxine until the scene when she's in the alleyway, and then she pulls out the gun on the guy. And when she does that scene, I'm like, oh yeah, I forget who we're watching here. And that's when I was like, okay, this girl is a badass. And that's when I was like, okay, yeah, don't mess with her. And there was like, you know, like they even throw in like an 80s montage when she's like getting ready to go to the club to take out Kevin Bacon. Like I eat that stuff up. Like I love that stuff, you know, like Batman getting ready back in the 90s. I love all that stuff. And the product placement. I'm a huge fan of product placement, especially when it's like older stuff. So like the second time I watched it, I was watching a lot of that. Like you saw St. Elmo's Fire it was playing in the theater. And then you see the, like the old McDonald's breakfast on the table. So I really appreciated that stuff. And you know, it was cool to hear like when she's driving down the road, she's listening to Casey Kasem, because that's something that I remember when I was a kid, was like Casey Kasem on the radio doing the top 40. You know, although it wasn't in the 80s, it was later on like the 90s, but I remember that. So it was a very nostalgic watch, and I really enjoyed the feel and all that stuff, that all the tender love and care that went into it. I think Maxine having she had a great opening monologue, you know, when she was reading or doing the lines, where in Pearl, she ends the movie with this huge monologue.
Yeah.
So I think people, you know, I think that's what, like, when you do that at the end, people are like, wow, it makes up for other things in the movie, to where you do it in the beginning, people kind of forget about it till the end. So I think you would have had like a huge monologue at the end that kind of showed, you know, oh, hey, Mia Goth is, you know, she is here. She's an effing star. You know, I think by the time the movie gets over, you forget about her opening, which was so fantastic.
That's a great point.
I'm not sure. I mean, one thing that I think that opening monologue shows about her character throughout the entire film is that even though she's reading off of a script and she is technically acting her ass off, it's showing that Maxine is actually capable of achieving the talent that she wants in life. You're also, if you've seen these other movies, you're also realizing that she's been through so much real trauma that she can actually, she's learned to hide it and use it to her advantage at this point. And it also, I said this in my video, that this movie, in my opinion, did a good job of making you feel afraid of her and for her at the exact same time, because there are people out to get her. She has a lot to lose. She could either die or go to jail for things that are debatable whether or not it's actually her fault, because at the end of X, I'm just sitting there going, did she really have to run over Pearl? And now that I've seen the movie, that one like question is actually shooting her in the foot. And there are all these morals that she does feel some remorse over, but it's too late for her to take back. And because there's so much that she can achieve, like she turns to her darker side more ways than one. And I mean, that alleyway scene in particular just shows how morally ambiguous of a character she was, because that's like the one fate worse than death in this movie that I think no one can deny. And just look at how many scenes there are where she's sitting all by herself and there's this wide open space. Every time I look at her in an empty space, I'm just going, is someone going to pop out and give a false alarm, or is a killer going to jump out or something like that? And only that one flashback where she imagines Pearl grabbing her while she has the plaster on her. Such a chilling scene. They even do like the flashbacks of X in a way where I didn't think I'd say this, but honestly, you could watch Maxine without seeing X, and those flashbacks you can mistake as being made for this movie in particular, because it lets you know that she did stuff that she shouldn't have, but it also made clear that there were enemies out to get her, and that I don't know, I just like that it doesn't spoil the story of X, so there's actually some mystery of what did she do at that cabin, how much of it was her fault, and how much does she have to lose at this point on.
Yeah.
So I'm kind of glad we're talking about Maxine's character, because it kind of goes back to what I was saying about this entry in the franchise, as well as retrospectively looking at the other two, what it really means to her character. I kind of went on a tangent about the filmmaking, but so yes, I think that in a way these stories can work on their own. I do agree with that, because while the flashbacks are shown, you would have obviously had to have seen X to know what that is. But let's say you're one of those that watches a film later in the series before watching the previous entries. I feel like you wouldn't be that far behind. However, I feel as though what makes the series what it is because going into Pearl, with Tyler, it sounds like it was a different situation because you had a different viewing order than most people, it sounds like.
Yeah.
But I feel like the reason why so many people cared about seeing Pearl was because of X, and because of, wanting to see a further expansion into the series. And the same thing with Maxine. Okay, now we saw what happened priorhand. Let's see what happens after. And honestly, the way that this as a while I will say I enjoyed my time with this franchise, while every entry has been new and whatnot, it weirdly is kind of a strange thing for me, because I don't know how much I think that the stories really, really contribute something meaningful on their own when it comes to Maxine and Pearl. Because I think of an example, say the original Star Wars trilogy. All three of those chapters have so much to do with each other. And when it came to Pearl, I feel as though what happens in Pearl is never mentioned in Maxine. You could watch X and Maxine without ever having seen Pearl. And whereas with Maxine, while, like I said, as a movie, I did enjoy it more than I didn't. I don't know if there was really that much weight to it, at least for me, as to seeing what happens to her after the events of X, because I wasn't one of those where I was like, oh yeah, for sure, she's going to be the next killer. I know that's what a lot of people were kind of thinking going into Maxine, is that, oh, well, is she going to be, the next serial killer? Because I know that was something people had been talking about, why she not only had been casted as the old woman in X, but also in Pearl. When we see her, a lot of people were thinking, oh, that's not for no reason. There's clearly a creative choice behind that. So one theory I was hearing for a while was, is she going to basically become the next Pearl, but in Maxine, if that makes sense? And I wasn't necessarily expecting that, but again, I don't know how. I say the word once again, meaningful, for lack of a better term. I don't know how meaningful this entry to me was in seeing what it was that happened to her. I enjoyed it, but I just there's something about it that was kind of lacking for me in terms of really diving deeper into her story.
I can understand that for sure. I mean, I will say this with X, I really couldn't have cared less what happened to Maxine, just because her main motivation was that she wanted to be famous and that this movie they were making at the cabin could be like a possible gateway into that. And beyond that, I didn't really care that much else. And they did reference flashbacks to the preacher like once or twice, but only once or twice. And beyond that, they never really mentioned it afterwards. So maybe watching X before Maxine helped me a little bit in understanding the backstory of this character and feeling like I see, now I'm already stumped on that one too. But I mean, I will say like X suddenly feels a little bit more necessary now that I like know what she's been through, in spite of what I said about how standalone they are. I mean, yeah, technically they can work on their own, but as Wes said, like they're there, each entry is there to like complement one another in some shape or form. And you can definitely feel the spontaneity in the fact that Pearl originally wasn't even supposed to exist. It was just some backstory that West and Goff were writing in between shoots, and they just decided, you know what, we have a crew, we have a little bit of extra money, this is like the perfect way to use this location again, let's just do it again. And on that level, it's definitely a good accomplishment. But I don't know, like I kind of like how X shows these two women, starts where one began and shows where another one continued, and it's different for a horror franchise, so it felt unique enough in that regard.
And like I said earlier, I could see them doing one more, but I could see it taking place in like the 90s and Maxine trying to keep her fame. So maybe that's when she becomes that killer that Alex was talking about, that some people have seen, because you have to do whatever you have to do to keep that status. So maybe there's up and coming people coming, you just don't know.
Yeah, I'm glad you guys brought this up, because I think comparing, Maxine and Pearl as characters, they both come from heavy religious backgrounds. They both feel trapped. They want a better life. And for women, for a lot of decades, that was like the ideal, like, oh, I could become a chorus girl and get the hell off this farm. Or fame, I'm sure for many young starlets throughout, the past 100 years has been a way of survival and getting out of whatever, potentially abusive or just horrible environment they're in. So I think that showcasing the similarities where they come from is really interesting to think about, because Pearl, who's just a complete psychopath and takes like the worst route possible, she's the villain of two films, and Maxine is the protagonist of two films. So it's interesting to see like the route they took. And I almost feel like, because we have to still be on board with Maxine and her moral code, and seeing her in the alley squishing that scene, that was kind of like shocking. We still were like fine with her, because this guy was, you don't know what this guy was going to do. It was for like the right reason to kill someone. Where Pearl was just like, anyone that came in her way, or if you looked at her wrong, she was going to kill you. So I just kind of think that maybe because we had to be on board with Maxine's decisions all throughout the movie of Maxine, it maybe kept almost like a limit to how crazy the movie could get ultimately.
Yeah, because she was definitely the anti-hero in this one.
Right.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Tyler.
No, I was just thinking, I don't know about the unpredictability getting in the way of anything. Because, I mean, the kills that we do get in this film, I think, are maybe not the best, but some of the best in the franchise. I mean, the car in the alleyway or in the junkyard, like, that I did not see coming. I knew Kevin Bacon was going to get his comeuppance in some way. I just did not think they would go that far with it. But, I mean, it was certainly... Hell, one of the most memorable things about that scene is Giancarlo Esposito is just standing there like he's done this before, and he doesn't even say a word, and I'm just sitting there going, wow, well, it's a good thing you're on Maxine's side.
Yeah.
It's Hollywood.
One of the things where it's like, you know it's coming, but how it's going to happen is where it gets a little iffy. Yeah, I could see that for sure. But another thing, honestly, this kind of reminds me of, I'm surprised I haven't heard any. I'm sure someone has said it at some point, but I'm kind of surprised no one has had a bone to pick with this being the lesser horror film of the three. Because I feel like I could see someone going into it expecting it to be a flat out horror film and being kind of disappointed. But a thing to remember is that when it comes to Giallo films, a lot of those are not straight out horror films. They're more like mystery / noir films with horror elements. And they're usually, I'm not saying that this was a super slow movie because I don't think it was really, but they're usually very slow. They test your patience. And the important thing with that is stylistically, there's a long wait between kills. And I feel like that definitely was the case here. So I don't know. I'm surprised I've heard no one say that, but that's kind of my argument is that if every entry in this franchise is a celebration towards a certain era of filmmaking, with X being like, low indie budget 70s slasher horror, and Pearl being like Technicolor Wizard of Oz, and this being like, call a celebration of Giallo and neo-noir, they do follow the tropes, pretty like that, in my opinion. So
yeah, I'm not super well versed in Giallo, but like, even though I was never constantly scared, I always felt tense in my seat, and I could feel my heart beating so many times, just because the thing that I love most about the scares in this movie is that for a while, even if you can guess the killer coming a mile away, the fact that you never see his face, the most you get are his arms, that actually made it all the more terrifying. Like when he goes into the theater and he sees what Maxine does in a moonlighting job, I knew it was him, but like the fact that it was him watching his daughter and getting the reactions that he does, just ripping the panel off, I'm just sitting there going, okay, yeah, that yeah, that is completely understandable. And I mean, they do a good job at not making it cheesy by not showing his face, like when Kevin Bacon's just looking at the side going, okay, this is a little bit out of my pay grade. And every X movie has done this, but whenever it shifts perspective, like whenever there's a camera filming something within that scene, it always switches to that 4x3 home movie aspect. Yeah. And the sound is always off kilter, which made it especially more creepy. Even during the Hollywood Hills scene where they have all those girls, and just hearing their screams in a found footage sort of way just felt all the more terrifying to me personally. And I think it was Dude Loves Movies that mentioned this, but the lighting in this too is just, it knew how to do 80s neon without over relying on it to the point where like almost every shot needed it to be that way.
Mm-hmm. Tracy, do you mind if I share my screen real quick and show something?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Let's see. So let's see. Pardon 1 sec. I have to type in my password, I guess.
That's fine.
There it is. Okay. Yeah, so can you guys see this?
Oh, I have to add it actually. So
okay.
There we go.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so what I was going to say, so with what Tyler was saying, it's actually kind of interesting because all the tropes you were talking about all are very apparent in Giallo films. And I brought up Blood and Black Lace in particular because I think this one showcases the genre the best. Like the killer in Blood and Black Lace, our killer, he has a hat. There's usually black gloves. And also Giallo translates to the word yellow. So with that being said, yeah, Giallo films were also known for really incredible lighting, like you can see here. And yeah, no, so it's actually funny, like you brought up all the tropes, and yeah, that's kind of what made those movies what they were.
No, good to know. I guess I better brush up on my Giallo at some point.
I almost feel like we should all like watch that and then rewatch
that movie. Yeah.
Well, like one girl that I worked with before the pandemic was just the biggest fan of Suspiria, and the images I'd seen, like with the neon red and green, I'm just sitting there going, that looks beautiful and fucked up at the exact same time. I love it.
Oh yeah, Suspiria is one of the most it's one of my very favorite films ever. But yeah, no, stylistically, that film is breathtaking. It's like, it's weird how it's contradictory, where it can be like really beautiful, like in the terms of the visuals, like with lighting and whatnot, but also what you're watching is very effed up, for lack of a better term, and so it's kind of a paradox in a way. But yeah, that's what, and this movie kind of was like that. Like I said, I bring up the VHS store dude in particular. Yeah, it's like there were breathtaking visuals and colors during that scene, but we're watching a guy get murdered. So
yeah. Yeah, and Maxxxine is a movie you feel like you just took off the shelf and put it in, and you're like, "Oh, this was made in the '80s." So that's very cool.
And I mean, Wes did so many things that he didn't have to do, like the wipe transitions or the split screens that just made you feel like you were watching an '80s movie. I watch a lot of Brad Jones, Cinema Snob, whenever he like reviews a current movie out, and he made a lot of comparisons. If any of you have seen it, that might click. But he compared it a lot to Vice Squad in terms of the plot and style of it all. I'm not sure whether Fritz or...
No, I don't.
Okay. Well, see, Fritz brought up Black Lace. I just figured that he would know a hell of a lot more than I do. But one thing not enough people have brought up when I see Maxxine reviews is the soundtrack. Is this is one of like the coolest soundtracks I've heard all year. Like, Give Me All Your Love, and I did not expect for an opening montage, especially the fact that it just fit the tone that they were going for so well. I knew Obsession was going to be a song in this because it's been literally in every teaser ever since they announced it back in 2022, that one trailer with the Hollywood Hills sign. And when I heard that song, I'm just sitting there going, wait a minute, I heard this. Where is... Oh my God, it was in my mom's fashion shows every time it was over. As they're all walking down the runway and posing, and I'm just sitting there going, fuck, I knew I'd heard that before.
I love the soundtrack. They were noticeable songs, but they weren't the cookie cutter songs that you hear in most movies that are made now. You know, like Betty Davis Eyes. Like, what a great way to end the movie. What a great song that doesn't fit, but yet it fits. You know,
if it's the era and the environment more so than the tone, but in a weird way that kind of feels welcoming. They could have slowed it down or reverb the shit like they do with most movies nowadays. And thankfully, Ty West has artistic integrity and decided not to do that.
Well, I thought, okay, so this is like a little thing that I've known for a really long time that cracks me up every time I hear it. So like the St. Elmo's Fire song, I'm sure maybe some of you know this fact, but it was initially written for the Special Olympics. And then when they wanted to use it for the movie, they just like changed the chorus to like just one line to St. Elmo's Fire. And like you can hear it in the song because it's like, I can be a man in motion. All I need is a pair of wheels. And like, if you think about it in context to what it was actually written for, it cracks me up every time. Like they didn't care at all. They're saying, let's just reuse this song.
That's funny. I did not know that.
Me, wow.
Yes. So yeah, I feel like with this movie, I can understand why people feel kind of disappointed because maybe like even including myself, like I thought it was going to be this like crazy, insane movie with Mia Goth and, you know, a lot of what we expected in the alley scene, but like a lot throughout the whole rest of the movie. I do think there's a lot more to digest than it just being like, oh, it's, you know, there's a lot more put into this movie than just, oh, it's this crazy time that we've seen in the past. So I do appreciate it that way. I kind of wish Mia Goth had been challenged a little bit more in this role. But maybe on a second setting, a second viewing, I'll appreciate it more. There's a critic who I won't name, but they said that they had never seen X or Pearl and they loved Maxxine and they thought it was fine as a standalone film. I feel like you wouldn't get you wouldn't get a lot out of it if you hadn't seen the other two, because I feel like there's no references to anything. And I know it's like should be a standalone film, but like I don't even know why you would watch it really if you haven't seen the others.
I mean, I feel like that era of mystery as to like what she did or didn't do is still there. But I mean, I will admit maybe there's a good possibility that me having seen X factored into it and I just didn't realize it. But yeah, it's completely possible.
Yeah, where like when you make a sequel, you don't want it to have so much of the last part in it, but you want some of those things thrown in there to be like, okay, because you're a fan of the previous one, so you want to see little things of that. And I know a lot of people who before they went and saw Maxine, they rewatched X. They didn't rewatch Pearl, they just rewatched X. Because people don't have time to watch both of them, so they're like, well, if I'm going to choose one, it's going to be X. And I think that's the best way to do it. I think X is more, or X and Maxine are more a good double feature where you don't have to really watch Pearl, but Pearl is just a nice cherry on the top. Like they honestly could have made Pearl after this one, because usually that's what they do. They make the movies and then they go back and do a prequel. But that's just my thought on that.
No, that's a great point.
Oh, that's true.
Another thing too, that kind of reminds me of something that I will say. I kind of was talking earlier about some of my problems with this as a series, but one thing I do like about it as a series is that one thing that horror, I think, as much as I love it, clearly, as much as I love horror, I would be a fool to not admit that when it comes to series and franchises, a lot of them feel very much so the same. Friday the 13th in particular. I mean, most of those movies feel way too similar, in my opinion. But with this trilogy, they all feel wildly different from each other. Not even just, like I said, when it comes to, being a big tribute fest to the genre era of filmmaking that they're referencing to, but even just in terms of story and plot structure, they couldn't be any more different, but yet you never forget that you're in the X universe either. So that's, I think it was one thing that I don't think any of the films sacrificed as, further entries came was, not being so different to a point where it's like, you feel like, oh, like, I forgot this was related to X, but also giving us something unique and a breath of fresh air every time too.
And the interesting thing is they throw in so many Easter eggs that exist within every film. Because I mean, the first two, they always have the references to the alligator that's living in that river nearby. The first one that I picked up with Maxine is when they're in the film studio. There's that ceramic duck that reminded me of the duck that got killed in the opening of Pearl. And then they take the head off and it's cocaine. And I'm just sitting there going, that is the weirdest Easter egg you could think of, but that's pretty spot on. And of course, like there's imagery of X's just about everywhere. Like in Pearl, she literally steps on the X for her chorus girl audition. I'm trying to think of where the ones in Maxine were, because those were a little harder to find.
Yeah, so I noticed this, the opening scene when the casting director is reading her lines, there's an X on the paper. And that I didn't notice that until second viewing, but it's an X on her side, so you see it from behind. So it's like a faded X. But I was like, oh, that's really cool.
Okay, yeah, that makes more sense.
Do you guys think, because I mean, at the end of the day, it's an A24 horror film, more of on the artsy side as a franchise. Both Pearl and X were more niche audiences. That when we get to the third film, it's built up such a huge fan base at this point, and it comes out on 4th of July weekend, and it becomes, in our minds, kind of like really mainstream. Do you think the fact that maybe audiences had this preconceived notion of like this 80s slasher with Mia Goth, more mainstream 4th of July movie, it not being that at all? Do you think that is maybe what people are struggling with?
I don't know. I mean, whether it was mainstream or indie wasn't really on my mind the entire time. Like, I feel like the position it takes on the subject matter of censorship and like gratuitous, vulgar violence and profanity in movies was a little bit more balanced for a mainstream movie. Because I will say, first of all, the opening montage where they're showing the Washington Wives protests and the testimony with people like Zappa and Dee Snider, I loved seeing that stuff, because that was such a pivotal point in the entertainment industry, with these artists showing they're well aware of what their audiences are thinking, and they trust their audiences to understand the difference between fiction and reality. I mean, Elizabeth Debicki's character literally even says no one would be protesting it if it looked that authentic.
Mm.
But at the same time, it also calls out people for being gratuitous with sex and violence. I mean, Maxine is always recognized on the streets for her body of work, and right down to the fact that some of the 4x3 shots are like the news glorifying the Night Stalker in the midst of all these other things going on. So, and Kevin Bacon's character even flat out says itself, we all have something vulgar about us, at least I admit it. That's basically the motto of this movie, and that's also the moral conflict for Maxine. Like, she doesn't actually openly admit that about herself, and that's kind of the reason she's in this situation to begin with. I kind of wish the movie was more subtle about that approach, because again, Bacon blurted that stuff out loud. Debicki's entire character is just to explain the metaphors I just did, and she deserves so much better than that because she's a really good actress.
Mm-hmm. And what Tracy was talking about, how this one was more commercial. This one was 100% more commercial because, like, she was on the Tonight Show talking about it. She was not on the Tonight Show talking about Pearl or
Really?
X. Yeah, she was just on the Tonight Show talking about it. And if you see the promotions they were doing, like, they have tours. You can go to Hollywood and do the Maxxine Experience tour, where it goes to like some of the filming locations. She has billboards up. There are no billboards up for Pearl. There's no billboards up for X. So this one is definitely more popular. But the thing about it is, I went to 2 different theaters to see this movie, and they were, each time they was in the smallest theater there. So
I'm so glad you brought this up because this
Really?
drives me crazy. I have to just briefly tell you about a horror story that happened going to see this movie. So,
Oh boy.
I have my tickets on my app. I show it to the guy. And he says, yes, theater 1, just like it says on my thing. He shows me where to go. I get to the theater. Lo and behold, what is playing in that movie theater? Daddy-O. We all know how I feel about Daddy-O. So then I walk into the theater, and it's a much bigger screen than what I wound up seeing Maxine in, which was shocking to me. But Daddy-O was playing, and then I finally found someone else was like, "Oh no, it's in theater 15," and I was like, "Okay." But yes, I'm so glad you brought this up. Maxine was playing in the most smallest possible theater they had, and I get Despicable Me 4, I get Inside Out 2, but like there were other
Don't get
movies.
me even started on that. There were 6 like kids dressed up as minions, 2 Drews, and 2 Grooves. One of them was like the long lost twin Drew, which I'm just sitting there going, really? That's what you want to cosplay as?
I love it though. I love that.
Yeah.
Whatever gets people back in theaters. Like if they love it, they love it.
Yeah.
I just don't know if A24, like sometimes they drop the ball. We've seen that a few times with like Iron Claw and things like that. And I feel like they kind of really dropped the ball here. And I remember seeing the estimates for the box office, and it was like 9 to 15 million or like 9 to 12 million. I was like, no, it's going to make more than that. Like everyone I know is seeing Maxine. And then it wound up being, I think, only 9 million, maybe, or 6 million that it made.
Yeah, it was like
weekend.
6 million. Yeah.
And I was like, what?
I felt like everybody saw that. It was like all people were talking about, like when you were on Instagram, that's all your post was. So I was like, wait, 6 million? I guess that's a lot for like a movie like that, but I just thought it was going to hit at least 10, you know?
Yeah.
I think it's kind of the other thing that I wonder if it has anything to do with, like, in terms of people's taking out of it, walking out of Maxine is, I don't know. I just feel like there's a lot of bangers that have just come out, as well as stuff to look forward to. I mean, we just had, Inside Out 2 and Kinds of Kindness, and coming up in a couple days we have Long Legs. So like I feel like we're in summer movie mode. So when you throw what was, I've heard about a supposed 4th movie, but when you throw a final conclusion to a trilogy in there with a fan base as big as you were saying, yeah, I can definitely see why that would disappoint some.
Yeah, I'm just wondering if it wasn't in a lot of people's theaters. I know some people that just within this community, they live in more remote places, and they a lot of times don't even get regular A24 films. But I feel like maybe this movie was just not in a lot of theaters, and I'm like, but you marketed the hell out of this movie, so I'm just so confused.
Yeah, I will say with that, like that was kind of weird. So I bought my tickets for an earlier showtime, and the theater was actually decently larger, but then we had a couple drinks and we were like, okay, we probably shouldn't drive yet. So we hung out for a while to kind of cool down. And then I canceled my tickets and bought some for like a showtime a couple hours later. And I looked at all the other showtimes and at a couple of theaters too. And yeah, they were all very small. And then, yeah, kind of like how you were saying, we won't name drop, but a couple people who live in more rural areas, yeah, they don't get A24 films at all. They don't even get Fox Searchlight. Like they didn't get Poor Things or Kinds of Kindness, funny enough. Oh, wow. Which is really
that is weird. Like I had the option of seeing it on the Wednesday night in the regular theater right by my house, or waiting Thursday night for the smaller art house theater that my buddy works at. And the smaller art house theater is making a much bigger deal out of Maxxxine in comparison. I mean, they were handing out like those headshots of Maxxxine that you see at the intro, like they were giving them out to anyone who saw the movie. Whereas in this one, I saw it with maybe 10 to 15 other people. It looked like a half full theater, all things considered the size of it, but it's rare when you get an A24 movie like that, or at least in comparison. Like I got a bigger turnout from The Green Knight a couple years back, which, you know, technically made more money than this has so far, but even that still didn't make its budget back because, I mean, in all fairness, Green Knight was harder to market given the pacing and the actual story of it all. But yeah, I'm still not sure whether to really deem this mainstream or indie, because it does so many things that are not mainstream. That's such minute details, like in that opening montage where they actually had the wipes of the actors, they had the wipe transitions, like everything that was specifically 80s that could alienate a lot of mainstream fans. But the story itself and the stakes technically would have been in any mainstream 80s movie at the point to it being familiar, except for the climax, because it's a lot bigger and bombastic for a slasher movie that I actually also enjoyed, because I couldn't see Maxxxine like taking on a killer with a knife, with a gun, or with it being all that exciting. So I get why people were upset about that. And I think people wouldn't have been if the cops involved were actually fleshed out characters, because that was the disappointing thing for me. Like, kind of like Pearl, it was more or less the Mia Goth and Ty West show. I mean, the mother in Pearl was awesome. The dad did a great job without even saying a word. And the projectionist was also pretty good too. Like Pearl at least had side characters that I remembered and cared for. This one has Giancarlo Esposito, who takes a while to like leave an impression, but as per usual, he does. And Kevin Bacon, who you remember because this is one of the most despicable characters he's ever played in a movie. But beyond that, like, Halsey's there to be a best friend. Lily Collins is there to be a would-be best friend. I don't know what the fuck Bobby Cannavale was doing, because that characterization made no sense whatsoever. Michelle Monaghan is just there. I remember, did any of you notice that the coroner in that was the guy from Cop Shop? Toby Huss. It looked like Toby Huss from King of the Hill, and I'm just sitting there going, the fuck is he doing in this?
Oh, actually, my boyfriend did mention that to me, and I'm not a King of the. I've never seen King of the Hill really, so but he has, and he mentioned that. Now that makes sense.
Okay, well, if you ever seen Cop Shop, he's the crazier second hitman that comes in halfway through the movie. Cop Shop was really good. Not enough people saw it.
Well, I'll put that on my list.
Yeah, and I do want to go back what Tracy was talking about, how they marketed the hell out of this movie, which, like, to me, I was like, oh, this is going to be a big movie. But, like, after I saw the movie, I went to, like, a coffee shop and then went somewhere else to eat. And each place, like, the waitress or whoever who waited on us or whatever, asked us, oh, what did you guys just do? Or, like, oh, we just saw, a movie called Maxine. And they're like, nobody's heard of that movie. Everyone we came in contact with, oh, I've never seen that. Well, oh yeah, it's part of the X, we never heard of it. And then like we saw, and then like both of them were like, well, we saw a movie called A Quiet Place 2, or A Quiet Place, whatever the new Quiet Place was. I was like, oh no, this is a little different than that.
It's so weird whenever I say I'm gonna go see something, and literally my neighbors, my friends and family, they all go, what's that?
Yeah.
Like, Friends like you guys know more of what I'm talking about, just because we eat this shit up every day. But
yes. Well, guys, I would love to hear your final thoughts, and we'll wrap up about Maxxxine. it was really just like such a pleasure having all of you, and all their links to their channels will be in the description down below. Highly check them out if you have not. But yeah, any last words you feel like saying about Maxine?
I just, go into it open-minded. It's not going to reinvent the wheel like when you went and saw X. Like, because when I went and saw X, I was dragged to go see X. I'm not back then I wasn't a big fan of A24 horror movies. Like, I like A24, but not A24 horror movies. They always get so overhyped for me. So by the time I see it, I'm just like, oh, that was it. So that's why I saw X. I think it was opening weekend. My friend dragged me on a Sunday. It was me and some other guy that was there. And I was like, oh my gosh, I love this movie. And I had no idea Mia Goth was the older lady until I was watching the credits. And I don't know if that's how it was for everybody else who went and saw the movie. And then after you see the movie, you see, a trailer for the new one. And you're like, what the hell is going on? This is unprecedented. Like, what is going on here? They just showed a trailer for the next one, then they filmed back to back. So I love that one. And then Pearl, I don't even know if Pearl is like a horror movie. It's a cool movie. It's like it's the artsy movie of the three. And then this one is more of the more commercial, more slasher, the one that they would, the masses would go see. So just don't expect like an A24 horror movie out of this one, I guess. I guess the only thing that's very artsy about it is maybe the editing a little bit. Right. But it's still a fun time. It's predictable who the killer is. Like I said, as soon as X ended, I was like, okay, so he's going to be a main character in the next one. And then when I read the synopsis, and then they cast Kevin Bacon, I was like, oh, maybe Kevin Bacon's going to play her dad. But then then I saw, oh, he's going to play private investigator. But then I was just like, this whole time, I just. Somebody's looking for Maxine, so I was just like, okay, well, it's obviously her dad because that's where they left off the last one, because that's just the trope where you got the priest dad looking for the daughter, so it's very predictable. But I didn't think that you were supposed to be guessing, but I guess you were. I think I just answered the question like 2 years before the movie came out, but I highly liked it. I think it would be my second favorite movie in the franchise. I like X. X is the more better made movie. I think also is Pearl. But I think if you want to have fun with like some friends, eat pizza and whatnot, you can always throw this. I think this one's the easier watch.
Yeah.
Yeah, it being the easier watch may have been the reason that it grabbed me a hell of a lot more, because I'm not generally a slasher fan in general, although between this and a violent nature that have been showing different styles of horror that I didn't think I would get into, I'm starting to become a bigger fan, and I'm hoping stuff like Long Legs this upcoming week keeps that streak going, because seeing that trailer or closing my eyes in between because I want to walk in as blind as possible looks fucking nuts, even for Oz Perkins. But yeah, just based on this conversation, I think Ty West is a much better student of horror than I originally thought, because the way he tributes 80s slashers, giallo, the editing choices that he uses, the great actors that he gets for such a simple but still entertaining script. It's hard for me to describe other than I just loved the look and feel of this movie. The atmosphere was so chilling, and Mia Goth continues to impress. I love the career choices that she's been making, except the Blade reboot, but let's just wait a bit longer on that one, hopefully.
Yeah, I would also say this was my second favorite in the franchise, with X being my favorite and Pearl being my least. I think it's not a perfect movie by any stretch. I definitely have some pretty decently sized gripes with it, but was I entertained? Did I have a good time at the theater? And should you go support this movie? I say yes.
Yeah, and again, I love how you all kind of said what was your favorite of the franchise, and they were all slightly different in different ways. And for me, I think my favorite is still, I think my favorite in a weird way is Pearl, and then X, and then Maxine. But I feel like I genuinely need to rewatch Maxine to have a better idea of if I might have just I might just need to rewatch it. We'll just put it like that. But anyway, I still enjoyed it. I was slightly disappointed, but I can see rewatching it, I might have a much better outlook on it. I want to thank you guys again so much for joining me. I hope you all had a happy 4th of July weekend. And to everyone watching, we'll see you all next time.